Hi, and welcome to the virtual tour of These Are the Places in Our Neighborhood by artist Jen Kennealy. She's part of a feature vault exhibition hosted here at the Art Gallery of St. Albert. And when I mean vault, I really do mean bank vault. We are an old heritage building, and our building was originally built as a bank. And on our main floor, we have a beautiful vault space that we now use to exhibit paintings and small intimate exhibitions. And so on today's tour, I'll be sharing a series of videos and photographs of the exhibition and talking you through Jen Kennealy's history as an artist and her practice and her motivation behind these pieces. My name is Emily Baker, and I'm the exhibitions assistant here at the Art Gallery of St. Albert, and I'm happy to be showing off this work for you to see today. And so I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see everything that I am seeing. And so as we go through, I'd like to start with a little bit of an overview of the exhibition itself. And so These Are the Places in Our Neighborhood is a series of paintings of buildings and other sites around mostly St. Albert, but also at Alberta as a whole. And so Jennifer Kennealy has been really interested in capturing different neighborhoods and especially heritage homes and historic buildings that are probably part of the community's identity and its own history, whether that's a conscious attachment or more of a subconscious and subtle attachment to these places. She believes that the architecture of these sites is something that's important to the community and important to their identity. But a lot of these places are starting to disappear. And more often than not, people don't recognize how important these places are, how many stories are associated with them until these sites are gone. And so Kennealy's motivation for capturing them in paintings is as a way to try and create a space for these memories and these stories to live on and remain relevant long after the sites themselves have disappeared. And so I'll just share a video here with you of the exhibition space. And so Jennifer Kennealy has a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Alberta. She graduated in 1993. And she's had several exhibitions locally of her artwork in the last couple of years, including as a feature artist at the Edmonton Convention Centre from 2019 to 2020, as well as her works are included in several private collections across Edmonton, as well as in London in the UK. After her finishing her university degree, Kennealy spent several years traveling, living and working abroad in Japan and in the UK and Ireland. During that time, while she was exploring and adventuring, she was actually quite creatively blocked. She'd felt a lot of anxiety towards painting and her creative self after finishing her university degree, and actually stepped away from her painting practice for quite a long time. When she returned to Canada, it was with the intention of starting a family and settling down in an area that she's familiar with. And she didn't actually return to painting right away. Instead, she actually ended up working with seniors in different facilities, teaching them different kinds of tools and tricks, both artistically, so in their creative sessions, as well as with technology. And one of her favorite computer tools to teach to seniors was to show them how to use Google Street View. And so she would show them how to navigate the platform and how to explore on their own, enabling them to visit places they possibly have never had the opportunity to go, so to travel the world freely, or to go back to places that have a lot of meaning for them, so possibly childhood homes, places where they raise their families, places like any one of us would have a strong attachment to. And so she would take them on these virtual walks and wanders through different areas using this beautiful technological tool that we now all have access to through the internet. And so she has a really great quote that was included in her artist statement for this exhibition about these interactions and teaching sessions working with seniors. She says, quote, "There was always a gasp of wonder as the map opened up into a 360-degree view, a split second of time captured, which allowed a lifetime of memories to be relived." And this had a really strong impact on Jennifer Kennealy personally, as well as we will find out to her art practice when she eventually did return. While working with seniors, she also worked to lead their art club, and she always found herself encouraging everyone to express themselves and to create without any self-judgment, despite any cognitive, visual, or mobility impairments that her students might be experiencing, and always to really celebrate this creative moment and this creative drive as an accomplishment in and of itself. And so she said that enabling this joy of discovery and this creative this creativity, free creativity and unjudgmental creativity in her students really encouraged her to return to her first love, which was painting. And so Kennealy has taken these experiences that she's had as an educator and rolled them into her own creative practice. She's resumed her painting more seriously about 3 years ago, and taking some of her own tips that she's used with seniors, she actually started to use Google Street View as an important tool in her artistic practice. And so she started to explore the area around her own home and further in St. Albert here, as well as further throughout Alberta, using Street View and exploring through this virtual medium. And she said, as a self-professed introvert, this was a really, really good fit for her. Having lived with creative anxiety for so long and feeling blocked and unable to produce anything, having this nice separation from her subject was actually incredibly helpful. And so there's another really great quote from her that I'd like to share with you. And she says that the trouble with thinking rather than doing is that nothing ever gets done. I've lived inside my own head for most of the time, but I feel like I've finally cracked the hurdles to my creative process. By using a digital tool to explore the landscape, I allow enough detachment to capture beauty, shadow, and light of a structure without the emotional overload of my insecurities kicking in. And this was a really strong push forward for Kennealy and really helped her to move forward in her artistic practice in a way that worked really well for her at the time. And so Kennealy says that she uses Google Street View as a way to explore and find these hidden gems that exist in almost every community. And so she'll wander around using Google Street View, and she knows she's stumbled across a really interesting scene when it feels like a place that has a lot of importance. And so she knows that it's somewhere special and that probably has a lot of memories. And so she always selects her views very, very carefully and with a lot of intention in order to get just the right balance in the physical composition of the work, but also to kind of capture that importance of the place that she's looking at. That being said, she does take a lot of artistic license and will edit colors or add different textures to the scene in order to sort of have that beautiful artistic flair and create a really strong sense of place in her pieces. And so while she's using Google Street View, her paintings aren't necessarily a one-to-one replication of the images that she's working from. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of a side-by-side to give you behind the scenes into her artistic practice. And so all of the Google Street View images that I'll be showing as part of this presentation are ones that I have harvested from the internet. And so Google Street View is constantly updating its image bank and constantly revamping some of its profiles. So there's a really good chance that the images that I'm showing you are not the same ones that Kennealy was working with when she was creating these pieces. And so she wants to create works that aren't necessarily nostalgic, but rather sort of capture that importance. And so these are places that the community recognizes as being not necessarily possibly iconic to the town, or being places that are very familiar to the people who live in that community. And so here's another set of pieces. And so these are both in St. Albert. Dr. Cooper's residence is on Belrose Drive, and you can see a Google Street View image of that piece here. And so it's something that she's really, really interested in, is these places that people pass every day. And so they're kind of part of the collective unconscious of a community. And we might not recognize how much they've formed part of the identity until they are gone, or until they're threatened with change. But taking a bit of a step back, I would like to talk a little bit more about her painting process. So how does she actually build the paintings that we're seeing in this exhibition? And so we'll take a detailed look at a couple of the pieces. The first one here is of the Blind Pig Pub in St. Albert. It is one of these places that has recently been torn down in this community. And when it was slated for demolition, a lot of people suddenly realized how much importance it had to them as part of their identity, or possibly as a place they really enjoyed being at the time. And so when it was threatened, there was a big campaign called Save the Pig. And Long Live the Pig. Unfortunately, it didn't save the building, but it did help it last a little bit longer in the community than it might initially have. And so getting back to building paintings, so how are these created in a bit of a step-by-step way, and what's Jen Kennealy's technique? And so she says that most of the time, after she's found an image that she finds really inspiring, she'll start with a black canvas. And so she'll paint the background of the canvas completely black, and then she'll use gesso in order to block out the major areas of light and dark. And so she's wanting to get the values of the composition right before she starts adding any color. And so what I mean by values is that balance of light and dark and medium spaces in a composition that have that kind of balance to it when you're looking at a piece. And it's a lot easier to do that with monochromatic painting, so using just one set of color and adding in more colors afterwards once you've gotten those balances really right in your values. And so when she starts, you can see on this piece that she uses her source image, and she sort of creates a grid on the source image and uses the same grid on her paintings in order to block out all of the compositional elements so that they're just in the right places when she's creating the painting onto a much larger scale than the reference images. And so you can see that in this in progress shot, which Jennifer was very kind enough to share with us, that the light and dark spaces are really well defined. All of the major features are included in the piece. And that once she starts adding color to the painting, you'll add in those midtones and textures to finish it up. She doesn't always use black as the underpainting, and so sometimes she experiments with other colors. And so you can see here in the piece that caught the St. Albert self-storage sign that she's actually used a hot pink background. And sometimes she'll let that bleed through a little bit in the final composition. And so if you're ever looking at a painting and wondering what the first elements and first layers that were added were, sometimes you can see around the edges of major forms what that underpainting color would be. And a lot of artists don't hide it completely because they'd like you to be able to follow their steps and kind of follow with them in their own creative process. And so you can see in this piece here that Jennifer starts with, again, that grid sketching in the major compositional elements, and she adds in the gesso and sort of a grayscale painting in order to get the values right. And then she starts blocking in the major areas of color. And so once those are in, she'll start adding in more of those midtones and textures in order to get the balance and the shaping in the pieces right. So adding in the sort of the shadows in order to give volume to the subjects. And once she's sort of in the final leg of the painting, she starts to smooth in a lot of the details. Sort of, you can see here, finalizing the cloud structure, really smoothing out those transitions between sort of medium and light and dark areas. So it becomes this really beautiful and cohesive piece. And so as we look at a few more pieces from the exhibition, you can kind of get the sense that Jennifer Kennealy has developed these really strong connections to these places. And so she spends a lot of time not only exploring the area around the buildings that she wants to depict, but also getting to know the images that she finally selects really, really intimately. And so she develops a really strong connection to these places, whether she's visited them in person or not. And so she knows the nooks and crannies and the ins and outs of all of the buildings. She knows how the sunlight lands across the face of these places and how the shadows play on the different textures of the walls. And so she says that when she does get a chance to visit these sites in person, It's almost like a very surreal experience because you're seeing a place for the first time in person that you know intimately well. And so she says that traveling to these places is something that she finds very, very meaningful. Um, on the flip side, while she's developing these really deep connections to these places, she says that this series of work is also a little bit of a study and an investigation of loneliness and our ever changing society. And so many of these places, like I mentioned, might have been community staples. They're very familiar to people who lived here, but they might not be registered as having that kind of importance on a day to day basis. And so they're part of the internalized memory of the community. They're part of the connection of what builds up a community. But oftentimes that's not recognized or even talked about until the buildings or these sites are threatened or gone entirely. And so she says that, quote, neighborhoods are changing. Little houses and businesses that once served to bring the community together are falling into disrepair. And once they're gone, their stories will follow. My intention with this series is to capture and elevate these small, humble places throughout Alberta to allow the stories to remain relevant and alive. And she says she wants that her buildings to be seen with kindness and respect, not only for their beauty as artistic and aesthetic objects, so as paintings in and of themselves, but as sites of memory and sites of history and stories. And so you can see here in this final slide, the painting Johnny's Store has indeed traveled to Johnny's Store, bringing the two together. And so kind of in conclusion, Kennealy's work creates these beautiful romantic sites that really allow a platform for reminiscing and memory and community building to carry on long after the buildings themselves may no longer be available for the public to view. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual tour of These Are the Places in Our Neighborhood. I am very happy that you're able to virtually join us for a tour of Jennifer Kennealy's fantastic exhibition of paintings. Keep an eye on our website and social media pages as we'll be posting more of these virtual tours for you to see in the coming days and weeks. And so if you want to visit our website, it's www.artgalleryofstalbert.ca, or you can find Art Gallery of St. Albert on Facebook and Instagram. We hope to see you soon, and thank you for joining us.